Good afternoon from Singapore and good morning to all our friends tuning in from Germany. Thank you and welcome to today's session where we will be talking about accelerating Industry 4.0 and robotics insights from Germany and Singapore. My name is Wei Min from SG Innovate, and for those who may know, SG Innovate is a government-backed deep tech investor and company builder whose mission is to help entrepreneurial scientists build deep tech startups that are looking to solve big global problems. Our work also involves building a global community of leaders, thinkers, and doers to drive and scale up deep tech innovations in areas such as AI, healthcare, quantum tech, and autonomous technology across various industries. We are very happy to have present this webinar together with Scalarate, which is a program by the German Entrepreneurship Asia. In recent years, Singapore and Germany has established many partnerships and collaborations in the adoption of Industry 4.0, and for businesses to take up the journey of digital transformation to remain competitive in the line of advanced manufacturing. Today, we have speakers from both Singapore and Germany to share their views on cross-border opportunities for Singapore companies and how can corporate startup collaborations be facilitated and established in Industry 4.0 and robotics. We encourage for all attendees to share with us your thoughts on the topic or interact with our speakers by posting your questions in the Q&A tab located at the bottom panel of your screen. Otherwise, feel free to just say hi and do a quick shout out from where you are from in the chat box below. With no further ado, do allow me to pass the time to our moderator for today, Theodora Georgieva, Program Director of Scalarate, for some opening remarks. Theodora, please.
Well, thank you, Amin, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very pleased to have this fantastic group of people who's going to support our event and share their insights. I just wanted to give you a quick introduction who we are as Scalarate. And so we are German Entrepreneurship Asia, and we are one of the Global Innovation Alliance partners of Enterprise Singapore, and we're supporting the expansion of Singaporean startups to the German market. And the way we do this is we help them to gain insights through structured ways. One is for companies who are very early in their exploration, we offer them a so-called program Explore, where we help them to get enough market insights so they can understand when is a good time to move to Germany. And we also provide services for companies who are way more advanced in their market understanding. They're interested to set up operations on the German market. We can share a little bit more about this later in the event. And we already have worked with few startups in the smart cities areas. You can see some of the logos on our screen, as well as medtech startups, also fintech and rethink. So some of our experts are here, and they're going to share also the experience of mentoring and supporting the entry of Singaporean startups on the German market. With this, I would like to actually start the official, the main start of the event, and I would like to invite Dr. Jon Howard to help us with a little bit better understanding of the German market and the Industry 4.0 and robotics trends. Dr. Jon Howard, he's a venture partner at BSH Startup Kitchen, which is main mandate is to help to support and to include innovation into the home appliances manufacturing. So he's very involved with the startup partnership, and BSH is also supporting Scalarate with mentorship and market expertise in navigating the German market. Thank you very much, and to you, Jon.
Thanks for having me, and let me just start up. Speaking a bit about trends and opportunities in Industry 4.0 and robotics in Germany, which should be quite interesting. My name is Jon Hauer. As Theodora said, I'm a venture partner at BSH Startup Kitchen, our startup partnership program, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. So Industry 4.0 is not really a completely new topic, of course, right? In 2020. So overall, we can see there's a fairly low adoption on a global scale, right? So less than 30% of manufacturers globally said that they have an extensive adoption today, which is good because that means there's a lot of opportunity to do stuff and to improve things. The big difference in terms of the industry that you're looking at. So Industry 4.0 is different. So for example, automotive industry is unsurprisingly, maybe because it's a fairly mature industry. There's some other areas of industry which are not that advanced in terms of industry. At which industry you're looking into, for example. What you have to see is that the area, the development of Industry 4.0 is largely dominated by big corporates such as Siemens, for example, again, a German company, which is supposed to be the leader of Industry 4.0 adoption worldwide, followed by GE and Boeing. So fairly big corporates that are advancing in this direction. At the European market, the technology difference is quite strong. So you can see that, for example, cloud computing is fairly advanced in the European markets, also in the German market. But some other technologies that belong to Industry 4.0, like collaborative robots or edge computing, are just not there yet where they should be, which again is a good sign. Means there's a lot of opportunity to support. 2020 was a special year, and especially European companies, especially German companies, were amongst the most cautious when it comes to budget planning. So it was a bit of a rough summer for us as well, but we're picking up pace now, and also in terms of startup pilots. So. Industry 4.0. Everybody has their own framework, basically. There's tons of frameworks with different aspects or different focus to put on. So we made ourselves our own one, which consists of, which you can see here, the 5 major key technology topics. But there's 2 more aspects to it that you should really be aware of. The one on the top is leadership and culture, which is also, in our view, part of Industry 4.0. And at the bottom, you can see environment, which is another important aspect that we'll touch upon. Diving more into
sorry, Leon, might have to cut you off for a short while here because I think you're a little bit muffled. So maybe can you try to just reconnect your earpiece and try to say something again, maybe?
Let me see just briefly.
Nope, can't hear you.
How is it now? Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Yes, now it's better? Okay.
Yeah, much, much better.
Great, awesome, great. So let me just restart here briefly. It worked before, that's why we tested it, right? So all good. Now, back to big opportunities in the German market. Okay, so I highlighted here the ones that, in my opinion, are the best or the biggest opportunities also for startups because they require the most assistance, I would say. Okay, so number one for sure is the smart factory. So what do we think about here? It consists of augmented reality, virtual reality solutions in the smart factory, standardization of interfaces, which is a lot of groundwork to lay there, but it's very important for the modernization and digitization of the factory. Low-cost automation, 3D printing, wearables, so pretty basic stuff if you think about it, but it's super important and in my opinion, the biggest opportunity right now in the German market. Secondly, robotics. Of course, like we've been doing lots of different startup partnerships around robotics as well, advanced robotics, RPA, human machine interfaces, so voice control in the factory as well as smart sensors. So again, quite a few things to be done in terms of robotics. And thirdly, cloud computing. So here's everything around system integration, connectivity platforms, big data analytics. And why am I putting this as third? First of all, there's some players who are really good at this already, so it's hard to assist them yet even further. And there's other players who still haven't done the smart factory stuff, so like the basic groundwork that needs to be set, the fundamentals, before you can actually go into cloud computing. So that would be basically my order in which to address the opportunities in the German market. And to be frank, I would steer away a little bit from topics like IT security and robust networks, unless this is really like your hardcore area of expertise. But these are fairly big topics, and I think it's much easier to work on something like the smart factory or robotics to begin with. So if I say we, just a quick background on what we do and how we work. So BSH itself is the largest home appliance manufacturer in Europe, has some 13 billion euros of turnover. So it's a pretty big German large corporate. And why am I telling you this? Not because BSH is so great, but because BSH has a dedicated startup partnership program. And I think this is key to all collaborations and to all also Industry 4.0 advancements that you can have in the market. Is we have set up this program 2 years ago, and we have done 25 pilots in total so far. 15 out of those are already completed, and 5 of them are still on track. So they have been adopted, meaning that there has been a second order. So out of the 10 startup pilots that we're doing currently right now, only 2 are out of Germany, right? So 8 are actually from outside of Germany, and we've had successful collaborations with startups from Israel, for example, from the UK, from France, from the US. So we're fairly used to working with international startups. And we do this in a very, very structured way with a clean and clear process and milestones. And this is super important for the collaboration mode. So there's still some challenges, of course, that we're aware of for startups entering the German market. And there's been a study in 2016, but we can still see that the results are valid today. When you talk about challenges in these types of collaborations between startups and corporates, the corporates say the biggest challenge by far is the cultural difference, okay? And that doesn't really mean necessarily the regional difference or where you come from, but it's rather a different culture in terms of working modes, startups versus corporates. So this is something that people just have to get used to, and we try to support there a lot as much as we can with this. Number 2 is the internal resistance of the corporate, so the not invented here syndrome, which means the corporate needs to have a clear goal of the collaboration, what it's there for. And if it doesn't have, then you as a startup should try to help them navigate and be super clear about what the collaboration objectives are from the beginning. And thirdly, it's the administrative challenges. So that's coming back to, you have to have a clear process, a transparent way of working, what's going to happen, when are the deliverables due, and so on. It has to be really professional to give both the corporate but also the startup a sort of something to hold on to and to know exactly when what is going to happen. So it gives a lot of structure. And similarly for the startups, actually, it's quite similar challenges that they have raised. So there's not much difference, but really the key points that you need to watch out for. So in terms of how to deal with it, so what does it mean now for startups and corporate startup collaborations? First of all, the question is where to play, okay? So as we've seen, the low adoption means that there are many opportunities for startups, especially for Singaporean startups in Germany and Europe, of course. So you have to choose your industry wisely. Yeah, you can go into an industry like automotive, which is on one hand quite advanced in terms of Industry 4.0. Yet again, in Germany, for example, automotive is now currently undergoing a big transition, a lot of pressure, cost pressure as well on the industry. So maybe there's other industries like manufacturing, like home appliances, for example, but also some other areas where it's just worth looking into because there's still some basic things to be done. And start with large corporates. So I know SMEs can be quite interesting, also in terms of maybe sometimes quicker decisions and an easier work mode. But overall, my experience was that if you start with large corporates, especially the ones ideally having a dedicated partnership program, it will make your life much easier. And lastly, I mean, how to win, as I said, be clear of your collaboration objectives from the beginning. Also try to be clear what the corporate objectives are. Follow a structured process with regular milestones. So just have exactly, ideally, if the corporate has a partnership program, follow it. Otherwise, you have to try to put a bit of structure in yourself. Be professional there and just embrace the cultural difference. Basically, there's no way around it. I personally have never experienced any issues, any troubles with German factory workers, for example, working with international startups. Haven't seen anything like this. They all speak English. They all are open to cultural differences. Sometimes it's the way of working between startups and corporates that can come in between. But so far, we've always managed to get the people nearer. So lastly, I want to leave you with some of the top trends for Industry 4.0 next year and following. So you can see some quite interesting things here, like lowering the energy used to impact the environment. Again, coming back to the sustainability aspect, or using cloud technology to optimize the production and production design, as well as making the consumers more part of the experience by gathering consumer data and feeding it back into the Industry 4.0 processes. But keep in mind, right, these are really the big topics, like the trends that you can see in terms of high-tech Industry 4.0. There's a big chunk underneath, which is the fundamental basics, which, as you have seen, around 70% still haven't touched upon yet of large corporates. So do not forget about these basic things like interface standardization, data collection, making data available throughout the company. So getting rid of Excel and emails for doing that. There's a lot of stuff that can be done to lay the groundwork to make all these wonderful things possible in 2021 and beyond. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Well, thank you so much, Jan. So here beside Dr. Jan Hauer, we do have also 3 other experts who are here to share their unique experience and expertise as startup entrepreneurs and also consultants and professionals in the Industry 4.0 and robotics industry. So just going to introduce each one of you. So I'll start with the lady. We have here the co-founder and CEO of Six Sense, Akanksha Jagwani. This is a Singaporean deep tech startup who is providing AI and IoT solutions for manufacturing. They're working with several players in the Europe, with manufacturing plants in Europe, and also they're expanding to the US. Then second, probably we can just give it to you, Akanksha.
Hi.
Well, hi. Then we have Andreas Radke, who is coming from the expertise from, I would say, industrial manufacturing and robotics from the logistics application, but not necessarily only. He is the co-chair of the Federal Association for Logistics here in Germany, and he's also consultant and MSc Solutions, and he's experienced in consulting and not only small and medium-sized enterprises, but corporates and startups and helping them in digital transformation. And last but not least, we have Andreas Enderlein, who is a founder and a partner at the investment company Hugo Capital. What they're doing is, apart from investment, they're also advising companies in digitalizing of their manufacturing and industrial automation solution. He's also previously has been a president of Asian of Schaeffler, and he's a member and executive director of the board. The two gentlemen are also advisors and experts at Scalarate, and their experience with supporting our startups in their journey to exploring the market. Well, thank you one more time for your time today and for sharing your insights. And probably I can start with the first question, which also is going to allow you to introduce yourself a little bit better and sharing your experience. So, so would you be able to share a little bit more about I would say the biggest challenge you see that the industry is facing now? I'm talking about the Industry 4.0 in general and robotics industry is facing currently. What was your role in solving those challenges? I can probably start with Akanksha. You're on mute.
Hey, hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on board. I'm looking forward to contributing to this session. As Theodora mentioned, one key challenge, I think you would be surprised to hear that most manufacturers still analyze their product quality using manual visual inspection. And such ways of identifying defects are not only challenging, but also cognitively demanding and very boring. At Sixth Sense, how do we remove this boredom? We are empowering the manufacturers with an AI-based software for defect inspection. We combine our expertise in deep learning with insights of defect specialists. So with this, the companies and manufacturers overall can now preserve their domain knowledge within the AI and also benefit from both consistency and speed of analysis. We believe our self-learning technology is changing the way factories have analyzed defects for decades and is paving the way for a future of self-intelligent factories. So this is the impact that we are bringing by addressing the challenge of manual visual inspection. Thanks.
Thank you, probably Andreas. I can see that you're on mute. If you can share your experience, Angela, yeah.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Right, so thank you very much for having me. Yeah, so I am an active member of the Scalar 8 program, so very glad to be here today. Yeah, with Hugo Capital Partners, what we're doing is really working together with startups and SMEs and help them to digitalize. So I have basically a background in technology. I've been working with companies, Siemens, 3M, and was previously the president for Schaeffler here in the region. Yeah, so I have both sides. I have the investor perspective and I have the operating perspective. I understand, I would say, you know, what are the challenges also in implementing these changes in a manufacturing environment. So with Schaeffler, we started a new manufacturing hub in Vietnam just 2 years ago. And, you know, we encountered all the challenges that you encounter if you start a greenfield manufacturing setup. And so I think that's really the background that I'm coming from. So very happy to be here today.
Andreas?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for having me.
If you can share also about your thoughts on the key challenges you're observing at the moment. Thank you.
So yeah, so very quick introduction. I'm Andreas Radke, Andy for short, makes it possibly also easier with the panel. I'm currently executive consultant with MSE Solutions, very much in the digitalization of supply chains. My experience has always been in supply chain in different industries, different company sizes, and that just is very broad, which also helps me then to be basically a mentor with Scalar 8, and is also very much a benefit to be co-chair of the BVL chapter in Singapore. When we talk about the challenges in terms of Industry 4.0 and automation, I think one of the key takeaways of decades of investment in digitalization has been that it has not been able to really benefit the companies as much as was expected. And I think that is basically the key takeaway that we have out of COVID-19. So a lot of the challenges that we have now is basically, it seems that a lot of the foundational work is done, that the data has been integrated, there's a lot of data available, there are a lot of tools available. But then the question is still, why are employees returning back to Excel, emails? And the key takeaway is basically, well, because the system is not doing what they would expect can be done. And that is simply where you will find that there is a lot of opportunity to contribute as a startup.
Thank you. Probably to you, Jan, if you want to share a little bit more on the key challenges and the way you are approaching this, is probably from your corporate perspective and startup interaction point of view.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Happy to. So I totally agree with Andy, because it doesn't sound so futuristic when we talk about Industry 4.0 and still have to mention Excel and email. Emails being sent around to coordinate work in a factory. And we also see that, for example, BSH has 40 different factories worldwide: China, US, Turkey, Europe, and they're not standardized. So not every factory, but many different factories have many different systems. So it's obviously super tricky to have one solution, even one sort of database, and then scale it across the globe immediately. But this is what we're trying to do. So, and we're still not giving up. We're still fighting this fight. And I think the biggest challenge that we have is, and other corporates as well, is finding the right partners. So I strongly believe that large corporates don't have to invent everything themselves, especially something like an optical inspection solution, which we've also tried using in our factories. It just exists. There are experts like Sixsense to do it, and we don't need to build this up ourselves. So we just use it. We partner up with other companies, ideally startups, because they have something like a new solution that we can use. And again, we try to do it in a structured way. So I think this is solving one of the big pains of large corporates learning more and more how to partner up.
Well, probably if you can just elaborate a little bit more on the opportunities for in this industry, what do you see like the key opportunities? You just mentioned, you and Andy, about opportunities which are now due to COVID. Actually, apart from challenges, there are quite a few opportunities for startups in this area. So if you can elaborate a little bit more on the certain opportunities you see in Germany, and like probably good opportunities for Singaporean startups to approach the German market. Potential opportunities apart from the challenges we just mentioned. You just mentioned the optics area, and there's still need for harmonization between the different manufacturing plants and analytics. Anything that you would like to add in this like opportunity area?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have two big additional opportunities, I would say. One is workflow automation. So we've seen that by digitizing our workflows, it's in terms of documentation, but also to be more transparent and have different interfaces. We've been using low-code software that we've partnered up with startups from the US to give us the possibility to model our workflows digitally and then share them across factories as well. This is something which is super important. And another one is also related to the factory workers, which is their skills and their qualifications, to have a system where you actually know which kind of skills you have on a certain day on the shop floor, basically, and which kind of skills you need to increase to qualify your workers over the next 6 months, 12 months, and so on. So having a system for that, again, ideally one that scales globally, because you have workers everywhere as a large corporate like us. This is super important to do. And again, we want to get away from Excel.
Thank you so much. So then probably to you, Andy and Andres. And I think a couple of questions you can also see which to you. For example, in the Q&A, so just probably we can help you with some of them. But I think we're going to answer some of those questions. So to you, both of you, because you're overseeing the probably more from the Singaporean side. So what would be the opportunities you see both in Singapore and in Germany, providing like given the latest developments in the technology, the Industry 4.0 and robotics?
So if I building on what Ian just said, basically, the three main areas at least from a B2B perspective is basically how do you actually, not just how do you operate within your organization, so basically bridging all the silos, and I think a lot of the silo thinking is actually gone. but it's simply how to make sure that the data is flowing back and forth, the decisions are flowing back and forth. So essentially collapsing the organizational hierarchies, making sure that whatever you need to make a decision is available from the systems that you have, because then you don't need Excel anymore. But the other two areas is basically how do you actually sell to your customers? So how can you as a startup also support your client in order to reach out to their customers? And then you basically have to look at, is it it's a B2B organization or B2C? And finally, it's also very much how do you actually collaborate with your customers? You will find that there are still only now starting to get initiatives going, where basically you send your sales reps out to basically have a tablet where you can enter right away what is actually the demand of the client, instead of having to collect that, go back to the office, then type it into an order sheet, but instead to have that right away available and ideally connected with your stock levels. So when are you available to deliver that? So your customer knows what's going on. These are a lot of these benefits that you can look at. Apart from that, of course, in terms of opportunities, it very much depends on how you're approaching this. So if you look at it from a two-dimensional metrics, if you look at the big corporates or the SMEs, and on the other dimension, do you want to have more of an innovation and collaboration, or you're looking more towards selling in terms of daily operations, then a corporate will be able to really help you with the mindset, with a lot of internal initiatives in order to do the innovations. And they probably also have a fairly big scale and scope in order to support the daily operations in a very narrow area that can be beneficial for them. If you look more towards the SMEs, which I think is, at least in Germany, a very big part of the economy, you will then basically find that if you look at innovation, you have to very quickly justify the investment in the innovation. That is basically, it's an applied innovation. It's not just trying things out and finding new ways. When you look at towards an SME with daily operations, really getting it sold, implemented, then you will find that there is a lot of connected thinking going on. So you have to make sure that you can communicate not just from a technology perspective, but also from a business perspective.
Thank you. Andreas, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, if I can add, maybe just from a more macro perspective, I think what is really important is that you understand as a startup also what's happening on the global landscape. So, you know, what are manufacturers really concerned about? So one topic is, for instance, supply chain. You know, how agile can I organize my supply chain to really deliver my product from a distribution center in Germany into ASEAN, or the other way around, out of China. So, you know, through the trade war, a lot of these supply chains have been disintegrated, and that's a big topic. So supply chain transparency, if you offer a solution around how you can track and trace, you know, internationally a supply chain, and how you can basically replicate that digitally, that's, you know, a tough nut to knock, but it's something that is really going to be very helpful. The other point is really understanding also where the manufacturing landscape is moving. So if you go to Germany, I always tell startups that want to go to Germany, you need to be very, very clear on what is your value add that you're adding to the ecosystem, because the manufacturing that is still remaining in Germany is very much high-end, right? You have a lot of competition also on the startup side. That is, you know, I mean, every solution that you're doing is already being done in Germany. So I think you need to have a very realistic assessment of your own capabilities before you go into Germany. So I think that's very, very important. And is your solution more maybe for a high volume, you know, or region or country that, you know, actually offers maybe a better environment to scale your product? So I think that's very, very important as a startup, that you that you understand your product and how it fits into the landscape.
Thank you very much. Probably we can just, if you have anything to ask Akanksha, to add from the startup perspective, and do you see any growing opportunities in certain areas which are more high on demand? And I think there is another question in the Q&A section, is actually probably to both of you later, but probably we can include this in the answer, is like, do you see any particular technology which are coming from Southeast Asia, which are doing well on the German market or high on demand, and vice versa, if you see like any German technology which are, I would say, doing well on the Singaporean market. But first, if I would like to hear if you can share a little bit more about your observation on key growth opportunities.
Sure. I think the opportunities in Singapore and the broader Asia are pretty much similar as Ion, Andy, and Andreas mentioned on no more Excels, decision flowing, no more data in silos. I think overall the objective that manufacturing companies in Singapore are trying to achieve is to become much more digital and proactive than ever. And the kind of technologies they are adopting or experimenting with are AI, IoT, cybersecurity. And the overall idea is to combine the physical and virtual world of production floor. And companies are also trying out cobots, which is a very famous concept from Germany. We have recently heard the news of Global Foundries sharing on augmented reality and VR. And ultimately, the applications would be in the areas of maintenance and logistics. So we do see a huge shift in the skills that people in this industry are acquiring over the period of last few years. One, I think, final comment I would like to make here would be that the volume of opportunities I see are much higher in the Asia world, as manufacturers are much more concentrated in this part of the world.
Yeah, and maybe if I can add, you know, what is really important, and it goes back to my other point, you need to understand the landscape and how the landscape is evolving. So you have obviously a platform, a push that is being led, as you rightly said at the beginning, by MindSphere, by Siemens. So if you go with a platform approach, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. So the horizontal game is a very tough one in the discrete industry, I would say, right? And then if you look at vertical use cases in the discrete industries, you can look at certain applications, but again, you need to be very, very specific and be clear which problem that you're actually solving. So I think that's very, very important, because the market is moving very, very fast. And as I said, the technology is not the main issue. It's really the scaling. How do you have a go-to-market strategy and an approach that can really bring scale into your startup? That's very critical, because we are not in the B2C scaling thinking, right? We are not just, we don't have a platform and we don't drive users on our platform. It's a much more complex delivery route to the end customer. So you need to play a very complex interplay between the different actors in your route to market. So you have the OEMs, you have the distributors, you have the system integrators, you have the planners. And that's something you need to really understand in every market. And every market, again, is very different. So you might have more system integrators. And if you look, for instance, at Germany and the automation landscape, it's much more driven by system integrators and planners. And then if you, for instance, come to ASEAN, there are almost no regional system integrators. So you have to actually work with the supplier, and they often do the planning and the system integration sometimes themselves in-house. So it just tells you how complex the market is, and I just want to raise that awareness, to all the startups, that you really select a use case where you can control the complexity and where you can access also the market in the right way.
Thank you, Andreas. I think this is just a good point to probably continue and discussing a little bit more about the main hurdles and challenges for startups when they're approaching such a complex industry. And probably, I mean, certain, as you mentioned, certain problems are already solved, but not completely solved. And how can a startup find the right area to play and to plug into the manufacturing, for example, digitalization. So on this point, probably if you can, Andy, if you can add also from your experience as mentoring and working with startups and investing in consulting startups both here and in Germany, what is your observation of the main hurdles that startups are experiencing in approaching foreign market and in general new solution, promoting their solution for the Industry 4.0 area?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to what the other panelists have kind of mentioned in a way already, is really to understand what is the value that you're adding. And I think a lot of times the island solutions are basically gone. You will find in Germany that there has been a lot of investment in technology. The key thing is basically to, if you cannot go into a specific niche, go for the complete integration. And that will then basically drive the value, because if you're able to basically overcome any disconnects in the way each employee of your client generates the value for the customer, and bridge those breaks in the value generation, then of course that will become faster. Those breaks are usually identified by having an Excel spreadsheet that's helping you there. The other thing, of course, is to be very clear about what the value is. So if you go in and you simply say, well, we add agility, we add effectiveness, efficiency, that will be too high level. You need to be a bit more specific. What is the specific secret that you have found which your competitors have not yet found? How do you actually generate that specific value proposition that you have? I give you this as an example. And the key thing is basically, because there has been so much investment in technologies before, one of the key things you need to be able to do is really play within that technology ecosystem that you have. A lot of the challenges in scaling is that you will find that a lot of the global offices of your client are not necessarily running on the same system. So you may have a specific ERP system in Germany. The overseas organizations are not as big, so they won't run on an expensive one, and something much smaller. But how can you still generate the connectiveness between those? And overall, it's really don't get too much lost in the technology. You need to be able to explain it once you get there, but really focus on explaining the value and make sure that your go-to-market strategy is working out.
Just feel free to jump if you have to wanted to add into the topic, please. If no, I can just continue with the rest of the questions. But I think probably, Jan, if you can share also a little bit more what you notice from your experience of the main, probably key areas the startups have to consider and really explore before they first exploring the new market, and second working with a large corporate in terms of manufacturing optimization, for example. What are the key areas the startup need to really observe?
No, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you from our experience with having done 25 startup pilots in the last 2 years, that there's basically 3 things that we're looking for in startups and that we advise startups to do. One is to be reasonable, honest, I would say, because startups are just educated to pitch and pitch hard. But it's not worth to oversell your solution. So because this will pretty much quickly come out where you actually stand in terms of what you're able to deliver. So be realistic about your shortcomings, like talk on eye level, I would say. Of course, you have to alleviate it a little bit to make it sound interesting, but don't oversell for sure. The second one is just professional execution. Okay, so if you promise something, just do it. And we have seen great technological solutions where the startup just wasn't able to deliver because they weren't on time, they promised something, they didn't deliver, and this gives a very bad mark on the relationship, even though the technology might be great, but it's just the way of working. Again, coming back to this cultural fit. So Germans are typically quite process driven, have to sort of structure and frame, and just be open about and ask, how do we want to collaborate? How do we want to exchange in terms of being open and transparent? And that's actually my last point, to have a transparent communication. So we had startups, again, with great solutions that faced some delays, and they just didn't communicate it openly. So we were left, or the project teams were left in the blank, to not know exactly what is happening, or at least relying on the solution coming or the results, and they weren't there. So just be open about shortcomings, about delays, and then communicate transparently. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Jan. I think actually you can probably share from your experience working with large German corporates like Infineon and Global Foundries. Probably what is your experience about working and scaling a technology, not only starting a pilot, but also scaling a technology into a company?
Sure, I would love to. Let me share on the overall experience. I think the experience has been very collaborative, and it's been full of dedicated efforts to make AI happen. So we had one mission for the last 1 year, make AI happen. And it was not a function of who is contributing what, but everybody in the company at Sixth Sense, at Infineon, Global Foundries were compelled to complete that mission. I think the cooperation has been leading to many vibrant ideas. To highlight a few instances, the innovation leaders at Infineon very closely collaborated with us to ship an AI strategy that's very collaborative, cost effective, and also time effective. So as with any AI process, there are certain very painful and repetitive parts like labeling the data, and we came up with a concept that demonstrated up to 60% faster speed on labeling the training data itself. So these are some of the examples of how companies are very helpful in collaborating and coming up with great ideas that we can work towards. AI implementation at factory-wide level takes more than just developing the software. And here Global Foundries has been putting various efforts to set up a dedicated cloud infrastructure just to make sure that AI applications are running well. And their operations team are putting in so much hard work to come up with the broadest variety of complex manufacturing data sets that we could input to the AI's training. So these are certain examples of how the experience has been super collaborative and dedicated with efforts.
Thank you. And I think I have a question to all of you, because I mean, quite often we hear here from Singaporean startups or Southeast Asian is why a German corporate or SME is going to work with a Singaporean startup. Is geographical proximity important? And is there actually how Singaporean, what is the competitive edge you see of Singaporean startups and companies in general? And what are the synergy between both the countries? Sorry. If we can share your experience, probably Andreas, because I mean, Andreas, you are also mentoring some of our startups.
Yeah.
In the industry 4.0.
Look, it's obviously a very broad question. I mean, you have to look at every individual startup, and but I think what I have seen here in Singapore is a very very motivated folks to really scale their startup. I think experienced also. Some of them are very experienced. Maybe coming from an MNC background, and others are starting from scratch completely out of the university. So I think it's a very diverse mix of different startups that you find here in Singapore. But what is really, I think, standing out is, I would say that the dynamism that you have culturally implanted here. People are working very, very hard, and they are really making sure that their idea is going to be commercialized. So I think that's really a strong point. I've seen incredible people here working very, very hard on the solution. So I think that's certainly one advantage that you might have.
So probably Ion or Andy would like to share your point of view on
yeah, basically to second what Andreas has been saying, but looking at it from a slightly different angle. I mean, the EU and Singapore have a free trade agreement for a year now. That is simply from a setup a big benefit. Again, you have this great diversity in Singapore already. Singapore is essentially a regional hub for ASEAN. And although the Germans usually say, well, Singapore is a gateway into ASEAN, but before COVID, you had the same way the other way around. It was usually a two-way gateway. So in that respect, there is simply a lot of know-how, a lot of intellectual capacity here in Singapore, which Germany can tap into. And in a way, there is to some degree a cultural difference in terms of Germany would like always to think through what is the implication. A lot of the data integration was basically somewhat slow because there was a lot of thinking about, well, how can we make this secure? How can we make sure that we can exchange this reliably without polluting the data that we have? While on the other hand, in Singapore, there's a lot of just trying it out. Let's see how this works. And to some degree, that's also how you would notice that if you have teams of Germans and Singaporeans would like to just get going, while the Germans are still saying, well, let me think this through. And that is maybe a good cultural difference, but definitely not nothing that an obstacle.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would echo that. It's really sometimes it's better if you don't have too much experience and if you don't think too much ahead, right? If you start a company, so I think that's maybe hindering some of startups in Germany. Coming from a very engineering approach to scaling a startup is going to be very difficult because there is a lot of variables that you just don't know and you cannot plan. So you have to be flexible. And I think, that's something that I can see really in a lot of startups. They're flexible, they're agile, they're digital savvy. So if you look at, how digitally the people are adopting here, the different technology, I mean, it's amazing. So that's certainly something that you can bring to Germany.
Absolutely, and I can tell you the corporate's perspective. Basically, we're looking for the best partners, right? And I've seen the cases where some project leads would come to me and say, "Look, I found this startup is just sitting around the corner. I know, like the CEO is my cousin or whatever," which is not the best way to find a partner just because they happen to lie around. So we source globally, right? So we just are looking for the best solution, and I think with programs like, of course, the Startup Kitchen, but also Scalar 8 and SG Innovate, it's just another bridge. It just opens up a whole nother pool of possible partners for us, for example, as a German corporate, to tap into. And that's the best way to look at it. And fortunately, we have the possibilities now to work cross-regional, to work remote, even if we ship some hardware, some prototypes across nations, and we still can have Zoom calls to discuss the project progress and outcomes. So everything is possible. For us, people are very open to that kind of collaboration. They just need to see what's out there, and that's what we're trying to basically show them to give them some appetite.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think you just mentioned that quite a few of your pilots is actually with international startups, which is very positive, I guess, for our audience. And probably this is also something that actually you can address is like probably now I guess post-COVID the companies are more used to, as you said, to operate digitally, but also to conduct pilots. And even when it comes to exchanging samples or even hardware. So I guess pilots is always one of the first step to collaboration. But what was your experience actually working remotely and now providing remote solutions for digital manufacturing. Do you think that there are opportunities now, and like I would say life is a bit more easier and there are less concerns about where geographically is located? The target, what was Jan was saying, is that it's more important the technology and ability to execute.
Absolutely agree with you, Theodora, that I think with this whole mindset change of accepting that remote work is normal has made it very comfortable and convenient for companies, offices in US and Germany to collaborate with us from Singapore. Time zone and seeing people in person don't feel very difficult for them. I think when inside their company, they don't see their colleagues every day, they get used to working with us also remotely that way. And also, I think the points that they embrace a lot is that if we are also a multicultural team, then it just helps set up connections very well. And that has been very helpful in connecting with companies across border and outside Singapore.
Thank you. So I think if you have anything to add on this topic, please free to jump. And I think there's some interesting question also from the audience. Probably we can just move a little bit more and focus on the robotics. And there is a question here in the Q&A section: is how accessible is robotic manufacturing to Singapore German startup designers, engineers, or manufacturers? Any one of you would like to add something on this question?
Let me try to give somewhat of an answer. I'm not quite sure the direction of the question, but basically you will find that there is a lot of robotic manufacturing in Germany available already. That was simply for decades was one of the ways to increase productivity, which increases the salaries of employees, and that has been working very well. So in that respect, there is a big familiarity with how to have that at scale. If you look more towards, well, if you are a startup and how can you get your hands on these kind of devices, there are a couple of ways available to get somewhat exposure to it. There is, I'm not quite sure, there was an Industry 4.0 workshop regularly in Singapore by a couple of German institutes, which I think is still available. You can basically work much towards how to get that going. The question that you may want to look at is, how do you actually get this integrated into the organization itself? So how does your client or your own team work with these technologies? And that is more towards a question of how do you actually train people, how do you set up the organization, how do you let them experience what it means to have a somewhat automated environment. I hope that answered the question to some degree.
Thank you, Andreas. So anything we'd like to add more on the topic about opportunities? Probably something we missed to ask you about your experience and synergy between, I would say, those two countries, Southeast Asia and Germany in general, because we also hear about how highly regulated is the industrial manufacturing in Germany, and also the area status probably need to consider and bear in mind when they're approaching a new market. Also GDPR and data security and compliance. Any other advice you'd like to give to Singaporean startups and SMEs who are looking at expansion into Germany and to addressing the manufacturing industry? To you, Jan, if you'd like to share.
No, I mean, I think what's really important is to understand also on a more individual level, on a company level, what the demands are, what the challenges are. This is something that we're trying to do internally to find out what are people working on right now. Because if your solution happens to fit that sort of challenge, the probability of adoption is much higher than just sort of cold calling and trying your luck. So this is something to go into, and this is why I said it helps if you approach large corporates, and also if they have a partnership program which helps you navigate through this complex corporate. Otherwise, if there doesn't exist this sort of program, you have to do it yourself, basically.
I think Akanksha, you wanted to say something, or would like to add anything for like final piece of advice from your experience to our audience about expanding and working with German and international corporates?
Yeah, I mean, I can share on things like, I think there are two key things. One is that devils are in the details. So please be very detailed in discussing the project scope and figuring out the exact expectations. You never want to disappoint them at the end of the project. And second is the companies are always looking forward to from a more scalable mindset. So please keep in mind that the end is not the pilot, that's the beginning. And how can you always explain them the overall big picture that they have in mind? Because no company is looking forward to be working with you for 2 months or 6 months. It's a decade plan that they want to chart out with you. So that's my final piece of advice. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. This is actually very, very relevant advice. And Jan is also actually, we chatted before the panel, and it's actually very important to look beyond the pilot and understand how you can scale your solution not only within the company or manufacturing line, but across countries, because we're talking for international MNCs. And the similar, Andy, he's also always advising the startups to see what is the scale of a certain project, especially when it comes to manufacturing and thus Industry 4.0. Those are solutions that takes time to implement. So in the invested resources probably should be really worth in future. Women, I see that you're here. Probably we're coming to the end of our event.
Yes. So is there any final closing remarks from any of the speakers? No.
maybe
Yeah.
this way, because we haven't really touched on it, but in case it's difficult to open up the market in Germany for a startup, it may be more about how to explain the value that you're giving and basically that scalability beyond the proof of concept, what Akanksha said. It's usually not any cultural barriers or language barriers, because that is usually not the case. If you walk into a room full of Germans as a non-German speaker, they tend to switch to English right away. So that there is a fairly open mindset. So that helps a lot. And if you look at it from the perspective of distance, that also is less of an issue, because in most cases you will no longer notice that someone you're talking to is not in the same country, at least currently. And they're actually quite happy you're not visiting them on site, because there would always be an issue around contamination, you, them, you. So that can be playing to your advantage. It's more about how you phrase it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for your time. Thank you, women, for putting this event together. And feel free to reach out to us, to our panel speakers, for further questioning and discussions.
Yep. So yes, thank you, Theodora, for the great discussion with the speakers. I think there's definitely great points being brought up from everyone. And for Singapore, we have definitely come a long way in adopting Industry 4.0, but of course, there's still much to be done in helping both big and small businesses in going through digital transformation, especially in the manufacturing industries. And one of the ways is really to be open to more collaborations and innovation in order to advance such a cause. So that being said, I would like to represent SG Innovate to thank all the attendees who have stayed with us till now. I'd like to say a very big thank you to all our speakers, Akanksha, Ion, Andres, and also Andres Andelin, because he has to leave for another call earlier. For the webinar, great sharing from everyone, and I certainly hope everyone managed to take home some learnings as well, especially if you're interested in expanding to the German market or doing more on corporate startup collaboration. For all the attendees, do keep a lookout for our post-event mail, which will contain a recording of this session, and do reach out to us at events@sginnovate.com if you would like to connect with any of our speakers or to have a chat with us for collaboration opportunities. Do also remember to give us your post-event feedback when you exit the webinar or through the post-event mail as well. With that, this is Wei Min signing out from this webinar, hoping that everyone will have a great day ahead. Stay safe, stay healthy. Hope to have you again on our next webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.